Today, we're revisiting part 2 of our series looking at the history, culture, and influence of South Street. For many tourists and so many Philadelphians, we all go to South Street for a vibe. I'm talking about the food, the entertainment, the shopping, and the music. So how did South Street come to be this cultural hub here in the city? Let's find out. It's Thursday, January 15th. I'm Trenae Nuri, and let's have some fun on South Street.
I have a long history with South Street.
That's Cosmo Baker, a South Philadelphian, also a DJ and music producer. He's performed alongside some of the biggest names in Philly music and global hip-hop. He's also got an encyclopedic memory for South Street.
Maybe some of the earliest memories that I've had were as a kid, like going to gyms. That was a thing. I remember that my parents would take us to Eyes Gallery, which is Isaiah and Julia Jazegar's, kind of empire at this point. My mom was an avid music fan, and my dad, my stepdad, my sister, my older sister was also really involved in the early 80s. She was really involved in like the Philadelphia hardcore community, the punk community. So music not only was something that was ubiquitous around me in my house with my mom playing records from Van Morrison and Thelonious Monk and, the Beatles and the Stones and Devo and whatever, but it would just be kind of part of the soundtrack of everyday life, going to school in a Philadelphia public school. Everybody had their, I'm going to age myself a little bit, everybody was walking around with their boom boxes, right?
And you found hip hop.
Yes, absolutely. Or hip hop found me.
But,
ultimately it was, even before I was DJing, I was spending a lot of time on South Street because of my mom's store that was there.
Your mom had a store?
Oh, yeah. So, this is interesting. So, in 1985, I think? Yeah, 1985, so 84, 85. And my parents came to a little bit of money, and they asked us, the kids, me and my siblings, we got some money. We're going to open up a store. What do you want to open up? Great. That's great way of wonderful business model, right? But I was just getting into skateboarding at the time, and I said, "Mom, you should open up a skate store." And then, probably just a couple months later, she's like, "Yeah, hey, guess what? We're opening up a skateboard store." Spike's Skates is what it was called. Spike is a nickname for my dad. The original location was at the original Mitchell and S sporting goods store, 13th and Walnut.
Mm-hmm.
It had expanded so quickly that my mom needed to get her own brick and mortar. So she got a space on Passyunk Avenue, right off of South Street. It's right across the street from the Condom Kingdom. It was actually like a really big thing. This is 86, 87. It was the epicenter of skateboarding culture in Philadelphia. And legitimately, it would be hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of kids that would come to Spike's Skates on a Saturday and a Sunday and would spend their entire day there. And it was a community. This was our tribe, right? And they would kind of spend their entire day at Spike's, and really kind of solidified just me kind of being down there and being a person that, you go to South Street. That's what you do,
Music attracted so many to the street. Underground clubs and music venues like J.C. Dobbs and the Ripley and Grendel's Lair drew crowds to South Street in the 70s and 80s. Bruce Springsteen and U2, The Police and James Brown all came through South Street. It also had a punk rock aesthetic, with the Dead Milkmen meeting punk rock girl at the alternative boutique Zipperhead, which had massive ants and a huge fake zipper on its facade. You can still see the building on 4th and South.
One Saturday I took a walk to Zipperhead. I met a girl there and she almost knocked me dead. Oh, girl, please look at me.
But by the mid-90s, hip-hop is what you'd hear if you were cruising down South Street. Cosmo's mother's skate shop eventually moved to another part of the city, but the building became part of Philly hip-hop history.
615 East Passyunk was the address, and that address actually ended up being really important in regards to the development of hip hop in Philadelphia, because a few years later, there was a group of friends of mine who decided they wanted to open up a hip hop shop.
When you say hip hop shop, what exactly do you mean?
So a hip hop shop is a place where you could get all the stuff that was hip hop,
Like streetwear.
like streetwear, like mixtapes, like graffiti paraphernalia and publications, a lot of other things like that. Ephemera and different kind of hip hop accoutrement. This place, it was called the Layup, was the clubhouse for all the hip hoppers in Philadelphia. And Layup was this place that started at this place in Newmarket, but then they moved to a secondary location, and that location was the same store that my mom's skateboard store was. And going there to the Layup every day, you'd meet a lot of people. You'd meet, your friends, your acquaintances. People were into graffiti. People would be into rapping. People would be into DJing. And the Layup was one of the first places that I started DJing on a regular basis because they had turntables in the back. And I'd be in there DJing, and there's this guy I met, Amir. He would just kind of be hanging out at the Layup, right? And him and I became friends because I remember one day he was going back to back, doubling up on a Sly and the Family Stone record, this record called Advice. And I was like, oh, I know that record. That's great. My mom has that record. And he was like, oh, you know this? And I was like, yeah, it's great. And I was like, oh, man. He's like, who are you? And I'm Cosmo. Who are you? I'm Amir. And obviously it's Questlove, right? But so him and I became like, oh, like you're like, I don't want to say like kindred spirits, but like, oh, I see you, you see me, like on the DJ tip, the music tip, right? And this is before I even knew about all them because they were a few years older than me anyway,
And you're talking about the Roots.
I'm talking about the Roots, but they weren't even the Roots at this point. They called themselves the Square Roots. It was Amir, it was Tariq, Black Thought. It was a kid named Josh Abrams, and Josh Abrams was a bass player, an upright, double bass player, and they were just like Kappa kids. Yeah.
Kappa is kind of like the nickname for the Philadelphia High School for Creative and Performing Arts.
I went to Central.
No beef, right?
No beef.
Okay,
no
good.
beef. All love, right? But like still Kappa kids are like, you know what I'm saying? So they were Kappa kids, right? But I would always see them down there. And they would always be, they would be these really awesome, like, instrumentalist dudes that would be out there playing. And they called themselves the Square Roots, which I always thought was such a cool name. But, they had to get rid of that name because there was another band that called themselves the Square Roots. The copyright stuff, I guess.
Yeah.
But yeah, so them busking across the street from the Layup, which was where everybody hung, was basically where they got their start.
And you were right there.
And all that happened on South Street, all that happened at the Layup, at 5th and Passyunk, down south, in like a tiny little bubble of time of like 2 years.
Tell me about the Remedy.
Remedy is a party that I did with one of my closest friends, Rich Medina, that we started in the mid to late 90s. And then when I moved to New York, we put it to bed. And, but over the years, him and I have been doing that party, kind of, it's him and I are the Remedy, basically. There was a nightclub on 4th Street between South and Bainbridge. Originally, the place was called Zero, Xero. And that was kind of a legendary Philadelphia nightclub. There was a guy named Tony Shiro who bought the nightclub and decided that he was going to create a brand new one. And he also bought the first floor, and that was going to be his restaurant. The restaurant was a restaurant called The Latest Dish. So Tony opened up this nightclub upstairs called Fluid. And I was one of the first people that he asked. And I was like, yeah, of course I want to do it. What night do you want? I said, I want Monday.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Why?
Well, two things. Monday, because it was, I was already DJing a lot at like other nightclubs.
Okay, that makes sense. So you needed an extra day to get some money.
So I needed an extra day to get the money.
Right.
But also the second thing is because Mondays have traditionally been like industry night, So like a lot of the people that work in the nightlife and the hospitality industry, Monday was their night to go out, right? So you could always, it's a little bit cooler. It took off, and my party, the Remedy, just all of a sudden just became a thing. I called it the Remedy because, like, again, me being in my early 20s, commercial music is so bad, puffy and all this stuff and blah, blah, blah. I want something where we can play the real stuff, right? So I call it the Remedy.
Anybody interesting come through?
Yeah. I mean, I had performances from Common and from Monch. And I remember one night, Corrupt, from Dog Pound, right? Because Corrupt's originally from Philadelphia, born and raised here, before he moved to LA and, got with Dre and all the Chronic stuff and whatnot. But he just happened to be in Philly.
Associated him with LA.
Yeah. No, he's born and raised. I don't know if he's raised, but he's born in Philadelphia. And I guess he was back one night that, in Philly, and he knew to come to the Remedy on a Monday night. Next thing you know, like, Corrupt's up there, like, spitting a freestyle while, like, Rich was cutting up doubles of, like, a DITC record. It was like, this is just so many worlds kind of colliding at once, But, like, anyone from, like, Outkast would be in town, or Lauren would be by, she was just around. These are just people who would just go hang out there, Like NSYNC, like Justin and Joey were there one night just partying. Pharrell would be there partying, But it's also like it would be them with just like regular folk, like Dilla was always kind of like, I revere him, right? So like I remember for like...
You're speaking about Jay Dilla,
yes.
the producer from Detroit.
Yes, Jay Dilla, is somebody whom I revere. And like I remember getting an opportunity to, to... like Slum Village coming down for my birthday party was like the biggest thing to me in the world.
Yeah.
So like to be able to be doing what it is that I was doing is something that I love, and also kind of creating something not just for the Philadelphia hip hop scene, but for Philadelphia and also for South Street, because that was the cool spot,
I listened to a track. It's called Live at the Remedy, 1998. And I was just like, yes, like when I heard Common's verse, he shouted out South Street. He shouted out Richard Allen Projects. I'm like, who took him there? The gallery. And I mean, it was just like, it felt, like you said, satisfying.
Yeah.
I went shopping on that street called South Street. Let me tell you the story. The shit was kind of glory. Us, the nigga since came to bus. I took the train here. Train through with a whole beer. I got a Heineken, that's my vitamin. I was there looking for...
Fluid closed in 2013. Philly's own DJ Jazzy Jeff and Questlove, fittingly enough, performed the final night.
Shit that I MC, I got a style free. She said, oh, let me take you shopping at the gallery. I said, I want no clothes.
Their path was paved a century earlier, when other Black musicians were performing on these same streets. Music is clearly part of the DNA of South Street.
Oh, shit.
Jack McCarthy is a Philadelphia music historian and consulting archivist at the Philly Jazz Legacy Project.
The name jazz starts to show up in newspapers and, other sort of networks in 1917. So jazz had been percolating kind of under the radar in Black communities in cities throughout the United States. Black musicians were developing these new styles all over the country, but you start to see it seep into the public consciousness in the late 19-teens in Philadelphia. South Street was the main entertainment corridor for Black Philadelphia in that early 20th century period, and mostly around Broad Street and West, because the Black population, the original location of it was in the eastern part of South Street. But over time, that area became sort of the home of a lot of Eastern European immigrants and Jews and Poles and Italians. And they all began settling in the lower part of South Street. And the Black population sort of got pushed out or sort of just moved westward along that South Street corridor. So that's why you had all these venues sort of around Broad Street or west of Broad Street. That whole area was the sort of center for Black entertainment in early 20th century Philadelphia. So there were these theaters, the Standard Theater. John T. Gibson took it over, I believe, in 1914 and began presenting like Black vaudeville. which included many jazz and blues artists. In 1919, the Dunbar Theater opened, which was at Broad and Lombard Streets. It later became the Lincoln Theater. And actually, John Gibson took over the Dunbar Theater, I think in the 1920s. So he was quite an entrepreneur, an entertainment entrepreneur. He was the wealthiest black man in Philadelphia in the 20s. And then he lost everything in the Great Depression. And I should mention also the Royal Theater at like between 15th and 16th on South Street. That was another major venue that opened in 1920. It was both a movie house and a live entertainment venue, and it was specifically for black audiences. But people like Bessie Smith and Fats Waller, and they all played there in the 20s and 30s. The theater itself, deteriorated and was demolished, but they saved the facade. And then they built these condominiums onto it. And then on the ground floor is now a restaurant. But yeah, that was a real focus of black entertainment in the 20s and 30s as well. In the 50s and 60s, Pep's at Broad and South Street, that was like the main jazz club of the city, the most high profile. And it was a large club. It seated like 700 people or something. Pep's was a jazz club, but it also presented other kinds of music like rhythm and blues. So somebody like Aretha Franklin or B.B. King would have performed at Pep's in addition to Miles Davis or Dizzy Gillespie. So that was the real heyday. John Coltrane was playing there. And then around the corner was the Showboat, another major club. All the major jazz artists of the period would play either the Showboat or Pep's. And of course, when they were playing during their breaks, they would run over and see each other and their comrades in the other club and jam with them. But there's some live albums that were made. Coltrane made a couple of recordings in the Showboat that were later issued as Live at the Showboat. At 15th and Bainbridge was Emerson's Bar and Grill, where Lady Day, Billie Holiday, performed. The real high watermark, the real heyday of Philly jazz was like the 40s through 60s, the mid 20th century. That's when the city was really home to just an absolutely amazing number of transformative musicians that either were born and raised here or settled here at a formative point in their development. By the 70s, jazz had lost a lot of its popularity with mainstream, America. Then the rock and roll kind of revolution came starting in the 50s and really taking off in the 60s. A lot of the jazz audience kind of died away or aged out. So a lot of the jazz clubs didn't survive past the 60s. Not all of them, but there was just this plethora, this concentration of them. And that sort of was gone by the end of the 60s.
After the break, we're headed to a dive bar that opened in 1969. It's one of the few places on South Street you can still hear live jazz every week. Stick around. PA Preferred makes it easy to choose local and support the farmers who grow and make the food and products we rely on every day. And the variety is honestly incredible. Pennsylvania isn't just dairy and sweet corn. We're the #1 mushroom-producing state in the country. We've got apples, hops, honey, maple syrup, flowers, and even fibers from alpacas and sheep. If you want to find PA Preferred products near you, start at papreferred.com. You can search for farms, farmers markets, and local producers in your neighborhood. And with the 2026 Pennsylvania Farm Show, it's the perfect time to explore everything our agriculture community has to offer. Choose local, choose PA Preferred. Visit papreferred.com. That's papreferred.com. Paid for with Pennsylvania tax dollars. I am on 15th and South Street. People are running, riding their scooters. There's an Indigo bike station right outside on the corner of 15th and South. And I'm standing in front of a mosaic piece of artwork, which is on the wall of the legendary Bob and Barbers. Let's take a walk inside. But when I walk inside, wow. There's wooden panels throughout the bar. When you walk in, it's hard to miss the bar because it's lined with a red leather cushion. I see so much Pabst Blue Ribbon beer advertising. And I'm talking back from 1936. There's a calendar all the way up to the 40s, the 50s, the 60s. You can tell because of what everyone's wearing in the ads. There's tons of memorabilia.
This picture right here, that's Norman Johnson. And you can come right over here and you can see he's looking right at you. Norman, he had one of those voice boxes. He used to spend a lot of time in here.
Jack Prince is the owner of Bob and Barbers, and he's showing me around the place and pointing to the photos all over the walls.
There's Bob and Barbara.
Oh, Bob and Barbara. Okay.
Barbara Carter.
They're black.
Yes, they are. This is from 89.
And you were friends with Bob?
I was friends with him in as much as I met him when I found out his business was for sale. Long story short, I ended up buying the business from Bob. Bob was the owner, Barbara was the manager. He was like a stoic kind of guy. He was not like a face man in a bar. Barbara was the personality. That's what they say. This block was basically, it was owned by Jewish merchants and African American merchants also. And like we had Junior's Barbershop a couple doors up, but that used to be Lerner's Deli way back in the like early 1900s. And then I guess in the 60s or so, it became Junior's Barbershop, and Junior was there till he died. And there were a lot of other like black hair salons and other businesses on this block. And there used to be like a hat shop and a haberdasher, and there were a couple of small grocery stores on this block. Obviously, all that's gone now, but we do have like 4 or 5 restaurants and 4 or 5 bars and a couple of nice hair salons and a fancy nail salon. And that's how it's changed. And this is the last piece of really the way it was. And I mean, like if you walked into this bar 40 years ago, you would see these same acrylic lamps and this same pad, the same top.
When I first walked into the doors, it is hard not to see the Pabst Blue Ribbon logo and ads all over the bar. And Bob and Barbers is still famous for creating a drink special called the Citywide. Tell me how that all happened.
When I was first here, which was 30 years ago, the house band, which was Nate Wiley and the Crowd Pleasers, they were already an institution. They played here on Friday and Saturday nights. And then they also had a jam session on Monday nights. And through some friends of mine, we started the Thursday night drag show. And Tuesdays and Wednesdays were just kind of empty, not empty, but not really busy. So we said, well, maybe we can do some stuff those 2 nights. And someone introduced me to Rick Dobrowolski, AKA Rick D. And he, for a fee, he booked me live bands. And for the first week, he said, do you sell Jim Beam? I said, no. He said, well, get a bottle of Jim Beam and get a case of Pabst Blue Ribbon and, sell a can and a shot for, he said, make it $3. So I did that. And the first night sold out. And the next night, the first 2 nights were After Dinner Mints and Dr. Ketchup. Those were the 2 nights, 2 bands. And the second night, same thing happened. So then after that, we started to buy more and sell more just because people were talking about it. And then a couple of our customers started to bring in old advertisements. Those lights behind the bar came from the Columbus Flea Market in New Jersey. And, just customers brought this stuff in. And then another guy brought in a belt buckle, and that's it. And then I started to look for stuff, and now it is what it is.
How important was it to have music, that live band, and the drag shows at this bar?
Oh, it was everything. Because you could come in during the day or at night, and there would only be a handful of people in here. But on the nights that Nate Wiley played, it was full. And that came from before me.
Just as jazz venues were disappearing from South Street, David Bradley moved to the area and was inspired by the bar scene to write a novel about the street.
My South Street, west of 7th Street, was pretty dilapidated, a lot of empty storefronts, a lot of what had happened was they were talking about building the Crosstown Expressway. So a lot of the businesses had moved out. Buildings were empty. What was left were the black people and the bars. A lot of bars in those 13 blocks. And I made it my business to go in all of them because I'd never been in a bar before. Country boy, and my father's a preacher, so we didn't go to the bar.
Oh yeah, you definitely didn't go.
And I got a very different kind of education on South Street.
So you walked in the bars, you talked with some of the bartenders, you're in college, you're young, you're energetic, and somewhere in these travels, it inspired you to write a book called South Street, a novel, which is a fictional book about a poet who learns about life on Philly's South Street. Is this book, is the character you?
No. First of all, I'm not a poet. One of the things that I heard on South Street were people speaking poetry. That the rhythms of natural conversation and words they were not supposed to use in public, but the way those words were used, they had a rhythm, they had a feel that, and people listening to people talk was like listening to a poetry slam.
You aren't the first person to write a book about South Street, right? There was a book written by William Gardner Smith. It came out in the 1950s. Did you ever read that book?
Yes. Actually, what happened, the way I found out about that was that he was an expatriate. He left Philadelphia, and as a lot of black people left America, black artists, and moved to France after the war. He did well in his books were paperback originals. Back in the day when that meant something, it's not good enough for hardcover. But The Last of the Conquerors was a really interesting book, but I didn't really read or even know about South Street until after I'd finished the book. I was actually rewriting it, doing the rewrite. It was under contract, and he came back to Philadelphia to die. as I interpret it, he was in his last days, and he came back to Philadelphia. But his book was very different. I turned in my version of South Street before I read his. It was, it was of a very exciting, lively South Street, flapper era. But it was interesting to see how many sort of fixtures, ballrooms and hotel, and saloon type situations were repeated.
How did you, I don't know, think about maybe your position as someone who is, you could say, an outsider? How did you think about authenticity when writing this book?
Well, I was an outsider, but I wasn't an outsider in the sense that most people would see that. I was black. These people were black. I was from some other place, but I was welcomed. I was not, they thought I talked funny.
One woman sought to celebrate the Black culture she saw thriving on South Street west of Broad. The late Lois Fernandez founded the Odunde Festival. It's known as the largest African-American street festival in North America. Bumi Fernandez-West is now the CEO of the Odunde Festival and the daughter of Lois. Tell me about your mom. I mean, this was her dream come true. She designed this festival back in 1975.
Yeah, so my mother went to Nigeria and she witnessed the Oshun Festival in 1972. And she came back and years later, she shared the idea with her friend Ruth Arthur, and together they co-created the Odunde Festival in 1975. My mother just wanted to create an event where we could celebrate the African-American culture. My mom said a lot of gang wars were going on around that time, and she wanted the community and she wanted the public to know that African-Americans are not the stereotypes that you see on TV. We are a loving people. We come from legacies. We come from our ancestors were king and queen. So my mother wanted really to highlight that and educate the community about that. And that's what she did with her idea. And I always used to say to my mom, did you ever think that Odunde would grow to this magnitude? And my mom said, Bumi, no. I never thought Odunde would grow to this magnitude. So that's why I say, as her daughter, that when you look at Odunde, know that you can believe in yourself. Because everyone thought that my mother was crazy. They thought, oh, no, they'll never let you walk down South Street. They'll never let you have an event. And so my mother was steadfast on that, and she put all her belief in God. And my mother would say all the time, Odunde is God. You and I are just the vessels.
And when she and Ruth started the festival, was Odunde greeted with open arms?
I don't believe it was. I think that Odunde has always had its ups and downs. We've always had people in the community and outside the community trying to stop Odunde. It has not been a fairy tale, but through the grace of God, Odunde has survived 50 years, right? And we are the largest and the only African-American cultural festival in the city of Philadelphia left. Right? Street festival left. And so that talks about a lot of festivals come and gone, but Odunde has stayed fast. So it's really key that people understand that you're going to go through trials and tribulations when you believe in something. Everyone's not going to like you. Everyone's not going to believe in you. But most of all, you have to believe in yourself. And that's what my mother did. She believed in herself.
Bumi, I'm curious, why is the Odunde Festival placed in this section of the city, which people call Graduate Hospital?
Well, I was born and raised in that area, and my mother grew up in South Philly too, near 7th and Snyder. And so my mother said back in the day, that area was well known for African-American businesses and African-American people coming there to do business and live there in that area. And so that's why it started at 23rd and South Street, because that's where we lived at the time.
In 2018, the city renamed the 2300 block of West South Street Lois Fernandez Way after your mom. What was that moment like for you?
I mean, that was powerful. My mom would have said, Boomy, ain't this some shit? Like, they really named a street after me. Boomy, ain't this something? My mother would have been cussing. You understand? And so I think that it just, how can I say, it was the period at the end of the sentence, because my mother lived a full life. And she gave her all to her community, to her people, and to the city of Philadelphia. My mother changed the landscape of cultural street festivals. When people saw Odunde, they went back to their cities and started their own festivals. So my mother lived a full life, and I think that it was the cherry on top when they named the street after her.
But while music fills the Odunde Festival every June, and the Royal Theater has been reimagined as a restaurant called Rex at the Royal, with live music on Sunday nights. And Bob and Barbers still has jazz and other weekly events. Cosmo Baker says the spirit of music that imbued South Street has changed.
I started to see the shift that was happening. When I'd come down and I would do parties, and I'd do parties in at Fluid, right? You saw that there was definitely a bit of a different way in which people were engaging with these communal experiences, right? And, you know, this is probably more in the late 2000s and whatnot, but you know, you could kind of see that there was a bit of a disconnect, and I don't necessarily know, you know, why.
I mean, the way we consume music had changed.
The way we consume music, the way that we communicate with people, the advent of like the cell phone and, you know, that actual smartphone, I should say, and then, you know, that social media and things like that, you know, very much so, more so in the 2010s. But also, you know, there was a big shift in South Street in general, if we're going to bring it back to, you know, this specific commercial corridor, you know, and it really goes back to me, kind of the co-opting of something that's cool, something that's genuine and something that's unique. You know, if you there's a song, South Street, that's where all the hippies meet, right?
Where do all the hippies meet? South Street, where the dancing is elite. South Street.
That's the Orlons with their 1963 hit, South Street.
Oh, baby.
I mean, obviously that was way before my time, you know, but, you know, you're thinking about something which is an authentic grassroots community, which is self-sustaining. And South Street is that. I'm not going to say was that, but is that.
Because that sort of like grassroots movement was happening on the West Side, like near Bob and Barbers, like, when like jazz was hot.
Yes. So I think that that's a really important thing because, you know, I've mentioned South Street, that's where all the hippies meet, right? In the sense of me seeing South Street in the 2000s, I really feel as if though there was kind of like this swing of the pendulum where it really kind of went from the opposite of where it was a place where people could get together and, you know, and find their communities, right? And thrive, right? And it became about commerce. And it became about the dollar, and it became about capital. And, you know, by and large, from, you know, the shutting out of independent mom and pop businesses, right, and bringing in, you know, Verizon stores and things like that, you know, and lost its, I don't know, lost its. I don't want to say edge, but, you know, lost its vibe, lost its character. And South Street is it's a rite of passage. It's a gathering place for kids. And right, once you actually stop watering the seeds, which are the youth, once you stop watering that, then the garden's going to stop to grow, right? So it's part of the responsibility of us as Philadelphia artists and musicians and people who love not just the culture, but the city itself, you know, to make sure that we continue to foster what may be something that would supplant us, if that makes sense. But, you know, that's life.
Do you think that is the future of South Street, or what is the future of South Street?
It's a great question. I don't really know.
We try and answer that question in part 3 of the series, which will re-air next week. That's all for today here on CityCast Philly. If you enjoyed part 2 of our South Street series, share this with a friend. Also, rate the show, leave us a review, and hit that subscribe button. Be sure to sign up for our morning newsletter to learn more about what else Philly's talking about. And don't forget, you can support the show and get great perks by becoming a CityCast Philly neighbor at membership.citycast.fm. We'll be back tomorrow morning with the Friday News Roundup. Bye.